What is up, everybody? Orange and Black Insider here, coming at you on Friday afternoon on the heels of some big news and just before a major event occurring in Cincinnati, courtesy of our friends Bengal Jim and his crew. Looking forward to that. We've got Jason and Kevin from 3 and Out and the Believe in Cincy channel that'll be there to cover the sight sounds, potentially some interviews. We'll see how that all goes. But I am Anthony Cosenza. He's John Sheeran, and this is the Orange and Black Insider. John, what's going on, my man? How you doing?
We're very close. I don't know if we can actually say football is back, but we were very close to it. And that in itself is good enough for me. It's been a long off season, longer than it has been for the past couple of years when the games went into late January, early February, but training camp it could not be more around the corner. That's exciting.
That is, yeah. And we'll get to that. That's, we'll catch up on dates and different things to know as the schedule starts. It's crazy that it's already here, honestly. Again, big next, last kind of calendar week or, this calendar week, basically from yesterday's news about the Ring of Honor, the event on Saturday, and other players starting to check in not only this weekend, but next week, that sort of thing. And then everything starts to kind of kick off from there. And we're looking forward to it. We're going to bring a lot of coverage to you on this show, on the Believe in Cincy podcast channel, with across the number of shows that we have there. And of course, on cincyjungle.com and A to Z Sports, where John's kicking some booty over there, covering the Bengals and the AFC North. In case you're new here, welcome. Hi. Nice to meet you. You can get this show on a number of different platforms through the Believe in Cincy podcast channel, primarily through iTunes. I mean, I think that's where most people get their podcasts, it seems, these days, but you can get it across a couple of different platforms, including, Stitcher and Spotify and all kinds of different places. So go check that out. You got to resubscribe to the Believe in Cincy channel, though. If you were catching the audio side of our show, Talking Football with Bengal Jim and Friends, Matt and Willie No Ball with Matt Minnick and Willie Lutz, as well as 3 and Out with Jason and Kevin. If you were catching the audio side of things through the old Cincy Jungle channel, that feed is gone. You need to now go to the Believe in Cincy channel, resubscribe there, and get the podcast shows there. And then, of course, underneath John, there is an Orange and Black Insider show icon down there. Click that. That'll take you to the channel. You got to click the subscribe button. You got to click the bell to be notified when we go live, when new content is available. And go do the things. Unfortunately, the Cincy Jungle Twitter account is not streaming right now. It's not linked up at the moment. So sorry, but the other Twitter accounts we are linked to, both the podcast one and my own, you can catch the live show there too. But we'll have to work on getting the Cincy Jungle one back up and running for the time being. But thank you for everybody tuning in, for subscribing, for sticking with us however long you have. Appreciate it. We're working on getting some special guests, as I mentioned last week, so we'll keep you apprised of that. But John Sheeran, we have, as I said, some big news. The Bengals unveiled the 2 newest members, as a lot of people know, for the Ring of Honor. One that we all kind of thought had the inside track, and the other a little surprising. And I don't mean that in a slight in any way, but I mean, we kicked around some other names, and we kind of thought we had a couple of others that maybe were going to go along with Corey Dillon. But the great Tim Krumrie is also going to be heading into the Bengals Ring of Honor with Corey Dillon. They will be formally inducted in the Week 3 game, home game against Washington. That's a primetime game, so that'll be fun. But just initial reactions to, and there's a few talking points we'll get to on this, that Corey Dillon and Tim Krumrie are now your newest Bengals in the Ring of Honor.
I think I should start with Krumrie first, just because, like you said, I think the conversation on Corey Dillon has been going on for a while. It was brought up last year when he kind of called out the Ring of Honor process and the voting process and everything, and he kind of let his thoughts known. But Krumrie obviously played before him. He played for, I think, 12, 11 years with the Bengals. He's like 5th or 6th all time in games played, which for just a rugged nose tackle is a pretty monumental feat, especially back in the day. Arguably the toughest player in franchise history. The most notable story, as you well know, is his devastating leg injury that he suffered in the Super Bowl against the 49ers in 1988, which happened to be, I believe, at the tail end of probably his best season, where he was 7th in Defensive Player of the Year voting. He made an All-Pro, so he's a 2-time Pro Bowler. I think he leads all defensive tackles in the history in terms of just tackles, which is still kind of crazy considering that's a position where that level of production is kind of rare. And to lead your team to be top in that stat when sometimes, the offense will run away from you and you have to take on double teams, just the epitome. I mean, look at the picture. Like, if you're watching this on YouTube, look at his nose. It's completely bloody. Like, his jersey is like that. That is a true 20th century football player right there. But Tim Krumrie, a guy I've never seen play with my own eyes, but have heard many a story of his legend and his toughness and his reputation. And this is, a classic Ring of Honor case where a guy who played a long time ago, played for many years, and made such an impact on the fans. Like, it makes a lot of sense why he got his time now.
We chose this graphic for a very specific reason. This just personifies everything about Tim Krumrie right here. As you mentioned, the blood, in case you're listening to the audio and not seeing the video stream here, he's got the bloody nose. It's very JJ Watt-esque, right? I mean, it's that same kind of cut on the bridge of the nose, streaming down the face and down onto the jersey. And of course, it's the white jersey. It's not the black jersey. So you can see the blood very apparent on his jersey, but absolute warrior. And this is kind of, to me, playing in the 80s, I think you could still call him, you could have called him in that era a throwback player, right? Just an aggressive guy, endless motor, just heart and soul of his defensive unit and largely the team. That defense, John, in that Super Bowl run, I mean, we kind of know, looking back at that team, we kind of know that the offense was kind of leading the charge there for the most part in that special season. Now, there are some really good players on that defense. I don't want to discount anybody there, but I mean, we talk about that offense a lot, the innovation on the offensive side of the ball. There wasn't a ton of, there wasn't the Lawrence Taylor type of linebacker / edge guy on this team. They had an outstanding secondary, right? Fulcher, and there was Ray Horton and Eric Thomas and Lewis Billups, and they had an outstanding secondary. Solomon Wilcots, can't leave out Solomon. But he really kind of solidified things up front and was a guy that just was tenacious, reliable, consistent. And then also, I think, he ended up coaching after. So I think there's this whole, longevity thing with Tim Krumrie that means a lot. And I think there is maybe a little bit of symbolism with this nomination. And I think a lot of the season ticket holders, John, and I don't want to, paint with a broad brush here, but there are a lot of season ticket holders who made votes in this process that grew up watching this guy. Right. I mean, he was in their era or, they were maybe around your age and really honed in on the team and what they were doing. And they remember this guy and him being on that short list. I think, we'll talk about this a little bit in terms of surprise because of some of the guys I even mentioned on that team that were on the Ring of Honor list that he made it above. But I think it also plays to just the unheralded value that Tim Krumrie had for not only that team, but just, a lot of years with the Bengals and on the defensive side of the ball. it's hard to say surprising, and I again, we'll get there in a minute. I don't like really saying that because we talked about this. You can make an individual case for each one of those guys that was on the short list to get in. So, I think there is a little bit of oh, okay, but there's a lot there that says, yeah, that makes a lot of sense for Tim Krumrie to be in this class.
Yeah, I think it's not as much of a surprise as is that spot next to Dillon. I think was up for debate, and it fit a lot of guys who are on the ballot this year, and it was just a matter of which way is the public going to go, which way are the season ticket and the suite members, where are they going to go, which direction. And obviously, playing in that era, like I think there was a recognition of getting someone who played on that Super Bowl team, who played in the heyday in the 80s, and obviously someone who's been around the team for so long and played for the team for so long. Again, like it's a rare thing for a defensive lineman in general to play 180 something games that he did, and to last as long in the league as he did, despite the injuries that he did suffer. I think also, I'm glad to see another defensive player make the Ring of Honor as well. Ken Riley was the only one up to this point. Obviously, the franchise its history is littered with great offensive players, a couple of offensive linemen, some pass catchers. So it's nice to see the defensive side of the ball get some recognition as well. And when you talk about, in recent history, at least, like defensive linemen for the Bengals have been top notch. You've had some of its best players in Trey Hendrickson, Geno Atkins, Carlos Dunlap, and this guy was arguably one of the first real dominant players on that position group, along with I think Tim Reed and obviously Coy Bacon. But yeah, a defining figure of that time in Bengals history when they were amongst one of the best teams in the NFL, and someone who made a lasting impact for playing over a decade. And now fans remember him still when he's, I think, 70 something years old.
So just kind of going over a little bit of in case, and this has probably been said across a number of different shows, and people have probably read some of the resume here. You mentioned a little bit of it. First team All-Pro in 1988, second team All-Pro the year prior. I think that was the strike year, 1987, if I'm not mistaken. Made the Pro Bowl 87 and 88. Obviously had the unfortunate ending to that 88 season. Who knows what would have happened had he not done, not had to leave that game there. But here's kind of the biggest. And then I'll say this too. I mentioned he coached the Bengals defensive line from 95 through 2002. And if I remember, of course, he left when Marvin Lewis came in and that sort of thing. But there were a couple of years in there where the Bengals defensive line were getting after the quarterback. They were doing some good things, particularly after they drafted Justin Smith in 2001. I think they had, Raynard Wilson. I can't remember if it was 2002 or maybe the first year under Marvin Lewis that he ended up kind of having a nice season, although being a bust overall. So, there are some nice moments with him as the Bengals defensive line coach. He kind of worked, I think, a little bit with some of the linebackers like James Francis, who was kind of a big linebacker that came off the edge and did some pass rushing stuff as well. He had a couple of nice years with the Bengals. So again, you're talking about a guy who was affiliated with the Bengals from 1983 through 2002. That's a long history and a long history of success, especially, John, when you were talking. We talk about, the length of the NFL draft, et cetera. I don't think this gets talked about enough, particularly when we talked about a two-time All-Pro guy, two-time Pro Bowler, all that sort of stuff. 10th round pick. The 10th round doesn't even exist anymore, much less the 8th or 9th round. 10th round pick, and the guy has this kind of career as a player and a coach, and now in the Bengals Ring of Honor. That says a lot.
I also accidentally aged him by like 6 years. He was born in 1960. He turned 64, and I want to apologize to my dad, who turns 64 tomorrow. So you guys aren't 70 years old. You're still in your prime 60s. Still got a lot of years left, and hopefully we do have a lot of years left for Tim Krumrie, and can't wait to see him back in Cincinnati to get that jacket. But obviously, he's only one of two inductees this year, and the other one, I think we all kind of assumed was going to be Corey Dillon. Now, the history of Corey Dillon, the Bengals, takes on a lot of levels and takes on both sides of the spectrum between happy and frustrated. I think now I just want to ask Anthony, first of all, like, do you think that this was like the right time for him to be inducted? Because obviously he had qualms about the process last year and the fact that he was maybe glossed over compared to some other Bengals greats. But like, you talk about, again, like the history of the team and its offensive playmakers, right? You have both quarterbacks, Ken Anderson, Boomer Esiason, Chad Johnson, Isaac Curtis, Willie Anderson, Anthony Munoz. Like that's a ton of great offensive players. And Corey Dillon is arguably, if not arguably, maybe the consensus best running back in franchise history. And it makes sense why he's going in as one of the first 9 or 10 actual players into the Ring of Honor. So maybe to him, it might have been a year or two late, but I mean, this wasn't a big surprise that he was in. Does this make sense in terms of like him getting in now after some of those other legends in the franchise?
It doesn't. It doesn't. Right. I mean, I think, and we'll talk more about this in a second as well, but this has kind of started to maybe become at least a little bit, because we saw what rightfully happened with Ken Riley. We hope to hell that it happens with Ken Anderson coming up too, that this is starting to become a springboard to rightful Pro Football Hall of Fame consideration for some of these players. They didn't get all the Pro Bowls because they were on some bad teams. They got overlooked by other players who, you know, in their respective eras, you know, made more Super Bowls and that sort of thing because the team was maybe a little more loaded. We're talking about, you know, a Terry Bradshaw as compared to, or a Joe Namath. When you look at the statistics stacking up against Ken Anderson, it's different. It's a lot different. And Anderson, you know, deserves his own place. I said this on this show. I had the privilege of being on Strawberry Ice's show again this week, and I said it there. This, if you look at the 2 or 3 major statistical categories in a running back's career, rushing touchdowns, I believe it's yards per carry, and rushing yards, Corey Dillon is in the top 15 to top 20 of all the players to ever play the game at that position in those specific numbers. Now, I mean, I know we're in an era now where there's way more metrics and different things, but I mean, that's just, you look at the 3 kind of major things that rings a lot. And he is basically the only guy in that top 20 who is not in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. I think the only other guy in there is Fred Taylor, and he's kind of having his own uphill climb to get in there as well. And so, and he played in an era in the heyday, really, of the running back position. Your Curtis Martins, right? Marshall Faulks a little bit, him, of course. I mean, Jerome Bettis. I mean, we've talked about that division. Eddie George was a great player for a long time too. So I think I'm kind of evading your question a little bit, but I just to kind of give an overall context of why Corey Dillon was inducted into the Ring of Honor, and hopefully this becomes a springboard to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. I do think in a way, though, that I don't want to say he deserved to wait sort of thing. That first class, that's a no-brainer, right? I mean, at the time, you had your only Hall of Famer in Munoz in there. You had a should-be Hall of Famer in Ken Anderson. You did, I guess, technically Paul Brown, Hall of Fame guy, right? So, I mean, all of that makes a lot of sense. You know, Chad really was a guy that endeared himself to the fan base, and for a lot of right reasons, he went in before Corey Dillon. But I think now these last 2 classes, you know, put in a couple of guys with Chad and Corey Dillon that you go, okay, these are guys that a lot of Bengals fans, especially in your generation, my generation, that grew up with watching and really became Bengals fans because of these 2 guys. So I think there's logic in him waiting because of some of the names in front of him, but there's an argument that could have easily been made that he could have or should have been in front of some players. But I hope he's all smiles now. And I hope that this continues to rebuild the bridge between he and the organization by him getting in this time around.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was what I was most happy about reading yesterday when all the news broke. He mentioned to Bengals.com, Jeff Hobson, his conversation with Mike Brown. And obviously those talks are always great to see, you know, once they get the call for the ring. But just what he said about that conversation was really nice to hear. Quote, "It was a beautiful conversation. To be honest with you, it was just like appreciating each other. I deeply appreciated that call from him. That meant a lot to me to finally have that conversation. It felt like we put a lot of stuff to rest just for that conversation alone. It meant a lot for me to hear these words. You deserve to be here." And I was like, I appreciate it. I deeply appreciate it. And I just told him thanks for drafting me and allowing me to grow. And he thanked me for everything that I did for the organization. It was just a good conversation. So this has been 20 years since he tossed his equipment into the stands in his last game, and he was traded to the New England Patriots, where then he won a Super Bowl, as he rightfully deserved. He was that good, and that's what should get him into the Hall of Fame conversation. But I think this was on top of him being as good as he was, and I do think that he's the best running back in franchise history. It's like him not getting in until this point was not an indictment on him, but just rather just the list of all-time greats that went in before him. Like, that was just the order of how things kind of went. And I think he's really the first inductee that, like, obviously he went in completely, definitely on merit. Like, there's no denying who Corey Dillon was as a player. But I think also part of the voting of him was not only did Bengals fans become Bengals fans by watching him, they stayed Bengals fans and continued to watch the team in terrible years because of him, right? Like, he was the main attraction for those teams in the late 90s and the early 2000s. You never knew when he was going to break off 200, close to 300-yard games and just run as hard as humanly possible 20 to 30 times in the game when no defense has ever respected whichever quarterback was handing the ball off to him. And, of course, his entire career is built upon proving people wrong and just channeling disrespect and everything like that. So this is what the Ring of Honor is all about, though. It's giving a player like him the chance to come back and be commemorated in the spotlight in a totally positive way. And like you said, put everything in the past to bed that was on the negative side of things, and just giving him the spotlight that he deserves. And just like it happened with Ken Riley, unfortunately, after his death, it only elevates his conversation to be eventually in the Hall of Fame.
So a couple of things here. We can espouse about this all we want, but really the last handful, there's a player or play. Well, there have been players in really every class, right? That we say, okay, these are guys who have been snubbed for the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And really, you look at, Ken Anderson, Ken Riley. Thankfully, Riley got in. Hopefully, Anderson is next. You look at, the class last year of what was it, Willie and Chad, right? So, you look at those two guys and you say, wow, those are two really good players who have Hall of Fame resumes. And then you have a player like this here, Corey Dillon, that you hope, has the Hall of Fame oomph that comes from this, right? So I deserving. I don't want to say definitively that, some of the quote unquote politics with him and the team and how it ended and all of that played into this. I will say this: kudos to both the Bengals and Corey Dillon for, when that parting happened. Very rarely does it work out well for both teams. Mm-hmm. The Bengals ended up getting a nice, some great couple of years from Rudy Johnson after Dillon left, and Dillon went on, won a Super Bowl, had, 2 great seasons. I think he played 3 more total type of thing. And so rarely ever does that work out. And you could look at some of the Bengals stars who were disgruntled and left, and it fizzled out, right? You can say Carl Pickens, who I think went to Tennessee and nothing happened there, and all kinds of different stuff. So I'm glad it worked out for both parties. I'm glad that both parties have kind of come together, even though it's taken a long time. And I know there have been a lot of Bengals fans and Dillon himself who have kind of put a better foot forward to make this kind of happen this year. I know there's been a lot of fans out there who not only voted for him, but advocated for him. I know, Bengals captain and Strawberry Ice and, a lot of those guys, Bengals and Brews, and those guys really, really helped to put him on a platform and give him places to speak that fans listen to, which is awesome. So kudos to everybody that kind of made this right. This was the right decision this year.
Yeah. And the more that we go through these nominations and these induction classes, the more I kind of think, man, this probably should have happened a lot sooner, because I do think there is a sense of momentum where you do this enough and you consistently honor your players and give them the spotlight on the national stage. And I think the more that happens, I think the more awareness that the general NFL world and the media just has upon the history of your franchise. And that in itself can take a positive toll in terms of these players existed and they were really good. And despite not winning a whole lot in certain points of the franchise history, I think the more that you continue to do it, the more positive momentum that you build. And I think the easier the work then becomes of, the advocates for these players, whether that transcends the fan base or just the organization or people like us who, come up every week and talk about it like that. So I just think it just makes everything better. And, I can't wait to see who gets in next year.
Speaking of which, we've got some interesting names that you mentioned did not make it in. So what's next? Who do you think should be next for the Bengals in their Ring of Honor, right? I mean, we'll pull up the list here in just a second so you can kind of check it out. But I mean, you're talking about your David Fulchers and Lamar Parrish, Max Montoya, one of Krumrie's teammates. I mean, the list kind of, and then you'll start getting more guys potentially being eligible, like your Geno Atkinses and AJ Greens and that sort of thing. So I don't know where's your line of thinking, and who may be new on the ballot next year, depending on the situation.
Well, that's an interesting question. I don't know for sure if the ballot's going to change at all or if or much next year. Obviously, they had 11 this year and 2 of them got in. So yeah, you'd figure that 2 more would be added. I don't really know off the top of my head who would join them, join the current nominees this year. But I do think that next year is going to be the first time where there's no clear cut 2 guys who are just unanimously favored to go in. And that wasn't even the case this year, right? It was just Corey Dillon, and it was up for debate that who would join him. I'm still going to bang the Lamar Parrish drum. I've done that for the past 2 years. I think someone who makes multiple Pro Bowls and All Pros back in the 70s for the team, someone who I still think to this day is underappreciated in franchise history, despite how his time with the team ended. I still think that his case is as strong as anyone else who's not on this list. And again, like it's very much up for debate who can also be there. It could be the time for Dave Lapham, to be honest with you. Like I'm still of the opinion that someone of his magnitude and impact in the franchise deserves kind of his own sort of induction where he doesn't have to be put up against a dozen different players who, I mean, admittedly had better overall careers than him, but just for him being with the team in several capacities for 50 years now, like that's still deserving of recognition on its own. But I also want to give a shout out to Bob Trumpy too. Just the first tight end that this team had that featured. He was an All-Pro and a Pro Bowl right out the gate, and still one of the most productive players at that position of all time. So it's definitely an opportunity to continue looking back towards the very early days of the team, in my opinion, especially because there's not like a clear modern nominee, I think, on the ballot next year that really stands out like a Willie Anderson or Corey Dillon did.
I'm interested to see if this starts to become positional focused. And what I mean by that is, oh, you know what? We did a running back last year. We can't do another running back this year. Oh, we've had a string of offensive linemen. Maybe we got to, skip the offensive linemen this time around type of thing. So I mean, I kind of have honed in. I know a lot of people are saying Lapham, I get it. And Trumpy, I get it as well. I've kind of honed in on about 3 or 4 names, and 3 of them all were on the same squad in the 1980s. And that's Max Montoya, James Brooks, and David Fulcher. I think those 3, based on amount of Pro Bowls, what they meant to that team, their consistent level of success. I think Max Montoya made 5 Pro Bowls. I think Brooks made 3 or 4, and Fulcher made 3 or 4 as well. Really helped carry that team through a really successful stretch. And Max Montoya was a guy that, I mean, of course, all of the focus was on Anthony Munoz, and rightfully so. And one of my personal favorites, not only because he's got an awesome first name, but been on the show and just a gracious guy. But I just, he was amazing. But you look at it, Montoya was another guy. This isn't talked about a lot. Montoya was another guy who played on both Super Bowl teams too. So, I mean, this longevity, success, and so I think Max Montoya is very deserving. I think David Fulcher has a solid argument. I think James Brooks, just one of the most fun players to watch, really, at his position, and just revolutionized that position at in his era, really. You had a lot of thumpers and big guys and all that kind of stuff, and he just was a do-it-all type of guy. And then, of course, you mentioned him, Parrish. I mean, I think that's just a guy that isn't up until the Ring of Honor. He was kind of a little bit of a forgotten guy in Bengals history. And he's another guy who's got, 5 or 6 Pro Bowls to his name. Now, some of it wasn't always because of defensive prowess. It was because of kick return ability, et cetera. But the athleticism was off the charts. The versatility was off the charts. And he and Ken Riley teamed up to be one of the best cornerback tandems of their era. So, I mean, for me, I think there's a solid argument for Lapham. I think there's a solid argument for, a lot of the others on there. But for me, I'm kind of focusing in on those 4 as, guys that could or should be in the next class.
I think, excuse me, I think approximate value is like a very imperfect stat, but the majority of Ring of Honor inductees are amongst like the top 15 in terms of their approximate value according to Pro Football Reference. Max Montoya is 11th all time in Bengals history. He's above guys like AJ Green and Isaac Hurst and even Lamar Parrish. I mean, even beyond his Bengals career, I think he played 16 total years at guard. And something that always stuck out with him, for me, he came on Daddy and Hochi's show a couple years ago. I think it was during COVID. And he talked about he went to the Raiders, and the Raiders recognized him even beyond his playing days as someone who played for them. He made a Pro Bowl, right? But he played like 5 years for the Raiders. He was more known as a Bengals player, but he still holds a lot of love for the Raiders for how they've treated him after his retirement and in his legacy. And I think giving him that moment coming back to the Bengals as a Ring of Honor inductee, that would do a lot for how he views the Bengals. And I think that would set a lot of things right, and maybe according to his mind. And also, I don't think we can forget Reggie Williams either. 200 games in Bengals history, and I don't think he ever made a Pro Bowl or All Pro, but multi-pay man of the year, city council member. I think it'd be awesome to see if you were going to vote in Lapham, having Lapham and Reggie Williams together, just as guys who were just a part of the team for so long and did so much more than just play, even if their playing careers weren't necessarily elite compared to their peers. I think those two would pair really well in a Ring of Honor class for just being more than just guys on the field and the impact that they overall had in the city and with the team itself.
Interestingly enough, you bring up Montoya and his stint with the Raiders. I knew he went to the Raiders. I didn't think it was 4 or 5 full seasons. That's just crazy to think about. But oddly enough, year after he left, which was 1989, he left the Bengals. He went to the Raiders in 1990. He and the Raiders played the Bengals in the playoffs that year in one of the most infamous games wherein Bo Jackson got hurt. And the Raiders went on to win. Bo Jackson's career was never the same after that injury, unfortunately. But Montoya leaves his team the very next year, faces his old team with his new team, beats him, and it's one of the most infamous games in Bengals history and really NFL history, Raiders history, for not the best reasons because of Bo Jackson's injury. But it's just weird how stuff can kind of work out like that from a fate standpoint, I guess.
You play long enough in the NFL, I think you're going to run into situations like that for sure. But, man,
yeah.
It was what, 1990. He was 34 years old in that game, and he still played 4 more years with all that all that pressure on his knees. So what a career Max Montoya. He'll get in eventually for sure.
He will. And you know what would be very, very neat, and correct me if I'm wrong, he and Anthony Munoz are very close, or were very close as teammates. They both went to rival colleges. Munoz went to USC and Montoya was UCLA. And so they had a lot of just, obviously camaraderie playing together and all that kind of stuff. And that offensive line was insane with both of those guys on that line. So for me, I hope he's kind of one of the next ones in line, and he and Munoz, who are buddies, can kind of say, hey, you and me again together, living this great level of success, professional football success. That'd be a good thing to see. So those are some of the people we think could be in the next Hall of Fame class. If you've got a comment, leave them in either the live chat or the comments of the YouTube channel and let us know who you think should be next for the Bengals in 2025. And also, if you have a thought too about if this starts propelling Willie Anderson, Corey Dillon, Chad Johnson into rightful Pro Football Hall of Fame discussions and or nominations, inductions into it. I know Willie's he's come pretty close the last couple of years. So if you think that this is kind of the next deal, the next domino to fall to get Dillon and others into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Let us know and why you think that as well. Again, this is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We're having some fun talking about the Ring of Honor, some good vibes here with Corey Dillon and Tim Krumrie making the 2024 class. And again, they're going to be honored on week 3 against the Washington Commanders at, almost called it Paul Brown Stadium, but Paycor Stadium, week 3 primetime game. So that'll be a lot of fun. I'm sure a lot of people will be excited about that. And I'm, before we kind of replug where everybody can find everything, John, on our show, I'm excited to see Corey Dillon's reaction on the field when he's getting honored there, and that smile on his face and just the exuberance he will probably show, because this has just become a full circle type of thing for him and with the Bengals. So I don't know. Personally, whether I'm there in person or seeing it on TV or whatever, I'm excited to see that.
Yeah, like I mean, there's been great reactions in recent years. I think Chad's was really cathartic as well. Just him coming back to, a place where he's known and beloved and everything like that. But the fans love Corey Dillon, regardless of all the things that happened, and he gave him so much joy when he played there. So that's going to be awesome to see.
Yeah, looking forward to it. So we've got potentially some new some guests coming on here in the next couple of weeks on the Orange and Black Insider. But in the meantime, check out our catalog of audio shows on the Believe in Cincy podcast channel, where you can get our show 3 and Out with Jason and Kevin, who, by the way, will be at Bengal Gym and Friends in kind of a designated media section. So we'll see what sights, sounds, interviews, and stuff that they will get for our channel and this YouTube channel as well. And a big thank you to Bengal Jim and his crew of great people that help him put on such cool events. And so that will be tomorrow, Jungle Jam and Jungle to the Hall. So check that out if you are in the Cincinnati/Newport area. I think it's sold out, but I don't know. Maybe you've already got your ticket. I don't know, but check that out. And then, of course, Matt and Willie No Ball with Matt Minnick and Willie Lutz on the podcast channel. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Underneath John, there is a show icon. Click that. Click the subscribe button, and also give us a like there if you would. That helps the show out. And tell your friends if you like what we're doing. Tell your friends. Tell your Bengals friends, your Bengals fan friends, or tell your AFC North fan friends, so they can come and make fun of us and tell us what dummies we are about the Bengals and the AFC North. If you want to do that, that's fine. We'll take the heat. But anyway, thank you for checking it out. We're going to get out of here in just a little bit. Before we do, we want to just kind of update you all on, little tidbits of news and, letting everybody know about the dates coming up, because training camp's right around the corner, John.
Yeah, man. 24 hours actually until rookies officially report to Paycor Stadium. July 20th, if depending on when you're listening to this, is when the rookies, and I believe maybe a couple of injured players, can get into the building first. They'll mainly just be closed practices, meetings, physicals, all that stuff. Quarterbacks will also show up as well. So that means Joe Burrow and his new buzz cut will be in Paycor Stadium getting ready to meet all the veterans, who then will report on July 23rd, which is a Tuesday. And the first training camp practice, I believe, is July 24th. Season ticket members will be able to view that one in the bleachers on the practice fields. It's, I think, exclusive to season ticket holders. It's one of 4 practices where it's closed off just to you guys. It's a really packed group now. It's hard to get season tickets now. But no, like that training camp around the league is starting up. I think the Chiefs and other teams have already kind of had everyone in. But yeah, that's kind of where the calendar is at this point. And I think the first fully open practice for the Bengals will be July 29th. It's the day after they do like the whole back together Sunday weekend type deal in Paycor Stadium, which is also, I think, only exclusive to season ticket holders. But training camp, obviously, multi-week ordeal, and it really all starts next week.
Looking forward to it. And in case you missed last week's episode, we talked about some of the things we're most in, the biggest mysteries. I think we did 3 of them, top 3 biggest mysteries, top 3 things we're kind of excited about, and top 3 things that the Bengals kind of need to figure out, more or less, that need to be sorted out during training camp in the preseason. So go back and listen to that one. We did kind of a deep dive into training camp and what we are looking for from the Bengals, their players, out of it. speaking of their players, we're not really in the era of rookie contract holdouts so much anymore with the rookie wage scale in place. But the Bengals have yet to sign their first round pick, and one JJ McCarthy just signed his deal. So Amarius Mims, for the time being, at least as of Friday afternoon here before training camp, remains unsigned.
So it's been a weird situation with the Vikings and McCarthy. There was some dispute about like how the bonus is going to be paid out and everything like that, which is essentially the only thing left that rookies and their agents can negotiate in terms of just like how much of the bonus is allotted to like certain years of the contract. So the Vikings had 2 first-round picks. They drafted Dallas Turner, the edge rusher out of Alabama, 1 pick ahead of Amarius Mims. They traded up to that spot in order to pick him. So they haven't signed Dallas Turner yet because they were focused on making sure that the quarterback JJ McCarthy was signed. And because Dallas Turner hasn't signed yet, that's 1 pick ahead of Mims. Like the whole rookie wage scale is like predicated off of like, hey, like pick 16 gets paid this much, and then pick 17 gets paid like slightly less. And it's all formulaic and everything, but until those numbers actually exist and pen meets paper, it's still like up for negotiation, right? So I think as soon as Turner signs, now that the Vikings will be focused on getting him signed, it'll be much more clear cut of like what Mims is going to be set to pay to get paid. And that's just how that's going to work. I think Ben Baby explained it really well on Twitter the other day. A factor in Turner's negotiations will be focused around like training camp roster bonuses deep into the future, talking like his 3rd or 4th year and whatnot, and how some picks get like a lot of percentage of their bonus in that year, and some picks only get like maybe half or something like that. So again, it's very, detailed, neurotic details in the contracts that are a lot less significant than they used to be when this was more of like the Wild West of these negotiations. But I think this is a case of eventually like some pick has to be the last to get signed. It's not an indication of like any animosity or like, oh, I'm not signing this unless certain demands are met. I think it's just about these payments or these amounts are like they're dependent on when and where you get picked, and eventually someone has to be last, right? So I think that might just be the case with Mims. He might his agent might just want to wait until Dallas Turner signs his deal, and then once that happens, I think everything will be clear, cut, and dry for them to do it.
Yeah, I don't. Again, this really isn't so much of a thing to worry about at this point because the again the rookie wage scale thing is a thing of the past, and man, the Bengals were unfortunately notorious for having contract holdouts, and as we know, it derailed quite a few promising careers. And this went into, and it wasn't always just because of the contract holdouts, but as a rookie, when you're going all the way through training camp and whatnot, preseason games, not getting those reps, and then getting in there right around the regular season, trying to get into game shape and integrate yourself into trying to be a productive player right away. It didn't always work out. It worked out for others. You had, I think Justin Smith was a holdout. I remember David Pollock was a holdout. Obviously Andre Smith and that whole saga that came from that. So, I mean, there's the list goes on and on, but this doesn't seem to be the issue that it obviously once was with the Bengals. And hopefully at this point, the Bengals start to get this in the fold and get this behind them so that obviously this thing gets resolved. But we're going to get on out of here, and I want to pull up some, John and I beforehand, I was like, do we want to do a remember him? I don't know. I'm just going to take a brief stroll down memory lane, John, because we've talked about Tim Krumrie, and I kind of didn't give a lot of due to some of the players around him, but there was a couple of guys that were on that team that kind of were contributing players, and they aren't really household names, but it made me think of them as we're talking about Tim Krumrie. And one, it was the kind of versatile player, Jason Buck. And I'll pull up a picture of him in just a second. Number 99. He ended up going off to Washington after the Bengals, playing for the Bengals. He left the Bengals after the 1990 season. He did have in that 1988 season, he did have 6 sacks, and was a guy that was a pretty valuable guy on that defense. Again, 6 sacks is not household name material necessarily, but I mean, it's something where you go, hey, he's a contributor. It was kind of one of those things that the Bengals just kind of put it together in different ways, right? It wasn't just the one necessarily dominant guy that came in and took over a game type of thing. I mean, that was more Krumrie, quite honestly, but Jason Buck was one of those guys that, was a contributor on that defense, played a couple of different spots, and they asked him to do a couple of different things. There he is there, number 99. And then another guy, Carl Zander, who was kind of a linebacker. He'd put his hand in the dirt here and there and rush the passer, and was another guy, number 91. Again, kind of, you could see where the Bengals, where the 90s really hit them hard, because there was between guys retiring, between guys going into free agency, whether it was the horrible plan B free agency where guys would, get poached off of teams. And thankfully that's no longer a thing. But I mean, you look at that 88 season with Carl Zander, he had an interception and played all 16 games and just was kind of a contributor guy up front. So those were 2 guys that I started to think about as we talked about Tim Krumrie. Do those names ring a bell to you at all? Are you familiar with either one of those guys at all?
I can't say I am. I knew Krumrie, and I think he probably just made a lot of guys better. But these dudes deserve their credit for sure.
Yeah. So anyway, just a fun little quick. Not remember him, remember them. Jason Buck and Carl Zander for this week's remember them. And I again, we didn't really prep one per se, but as we kind of started talking about Tim Krumrie and his value to the team, I wanted to at least give a little bit of a shout out to these guys who flanked him on the defensive side of the ball. And not a lot of people talk about them. That's why I wanted to bring them up. But let's drop the mic and get on out of here. What do you have for us, John Sheeran, going out the door?
I think I mentioned it earlier in the show. Happy early birthday to my pops. He turned 64 on July 20th, so tomorrow. He's the guy that, beyond just taking me to Bengals games when I was young, he's a diehard UC fan. And speaking of UC, played my first college football game last night. That's why I'm exhausted right now, and I might just get back into it. So sorry, UC football is not good enough right now, and I know my dad's not the happiest about it, but we can make our own reality now. But now that we can play Dynasty and maybe fire Scott Satterfield or something like that.
Yeah. So you're talking about the NCAA football game, the
Yep.
video game, right? Yeah.
Yep.
So I made the mistake. I'm a dummy. I used to play video games a lot, but I don't play them anymore. I do have an Xbox One. And so last night I'm like, I think that game's out. I want to go buy it. Well, it turns out I think it's only for Xbox XS or something. So I'm like, okay. And I am, truth be told, a little bit more of a PlayStation guy, but I only have a PS4. I don't have a PS5. So I bought it and I'm like, okay, it's downloading. Awesome. And then I was like, that's not for this system. That is
no.
a real big bummer. Yeah. So now I had to appeal to Xbox. And I'm like, give me my money back, dude. So anyway, at least digitally, that's how it worked. Are the hard copies? Is that coming out for Xbox One, or is Xbox One just totally passe and PS4 passe now, and they don't want to do it?
No, I think you could still get a disc, but yeah, it's obviously way easier to just buy it online and download it, so you don't have to go to the store or anything like that. But there's still discs out there for sure.
Okay, all right, maybe that was just my mistake then, dummy Anthony. Gosh, pay attention to stuff, won't you? As if I don't have anything else going on, but. No, I mentioned just alongside of me being a dummy and purchasing the wrong version of the video game. Is it good? Did you play it? It's good.
It's very good. Wow.
It's so good. He's losing his voice. Yeah.
It's so good. Like I was yelling all night about it. No. I remember like the engine for like college football being different than Madden. And I was worried like how the two would kind of meld together, as there's been like 11 years since the game came out. But no, it's distinctly different, I think, in terms of gameplay from Madden. It's still basically, it's more or less the same thing, but I think there is enough differences where it's not going to get old. Like I haven't played like a Madden in years. I got tired of like the gameplay just deteriorating, but college football, I think historically was better in terms of that department of the game, and I think that still rings true today. And the attention to detail in the game is phenomenal too. So it's been worth a decade-long wait.
Okay, good to know. I may do a little department store run here in just a little bit to actually get the disc and not the digital version. So yes, anyway, happy birthday, Mr. Sheeran. He is a Tim as well, right?
He is a Tim.
Yeah, so the Tim's having a good couple of days here. Tim Krumrie and Tim Sheeran having some good times. Happy birthday to him. And thanks to Strawberry Ice for having, I think, both of us on this week, right? Weren't you? I think he was on. You were on as well. John was on earlier this week, so was I. So that was a lot of fun. But at any rate, that's going to do it for this program. If you can, go resubscribe to the Believe in Cincy podcast channel, where you can get your slate of shows, and subscribe to the YouTube channel there as you would. John just had to casually step out for a brief second, and now he's back. So we're going to get on out of here. He's anxious to go. I get it. I mean, he's got his weekend ahead of him. He's got things to do. So you were just anxious to go. You got itchy trigger finger. I get it.
That was literally what I was like, what if I press this button? And all of a sudden, oh shit.
Well, have a good weekend, buddy. Have a good weekend, everybody. And we'll talk to you soon. Training camp next week. A lot to talk about. Hopefully we'll get some good guests for you coming up here. We're working on it, and we'll get to that. Have a good weekend, everybody. Take care, and we will see you soon. Congratulations to Corey Dillon and Tim Krumrie once again, also, as we get out of here. Later.